Welcome to PremierTV. I'm Jill Jacinto, the Mercer Premier Digital Platform Manager. On today's Premier Talk, we'll be discussing diversity and inclusion technology, the rise of the Transformative Market report that was recently released. We are joined by report authors Stasha Gar, co-founder and principal analyst at RedThread Research, and Carol Jackson, principal in our diversity and inclusion practice at Mercer. Over the past few years, there have been an influx of D&I technology vendors entering the market, leaving companies wondering how to decide what options are best for them. Stacia and Carol mapped the market for D&I tech, including feedback from companies who are using these tools. They'll be discussing their findings exclusively for Premier Platform members. During our chat, if you have any questions or comments, make sure to type them into the comment thread below. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us. I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Great, thank you, Jill. Thanks. We're excited to share some of the highlights from our D&I technology report. We're going to spend about 20 minutes today, but we are hosting a in-depth webinar on March 6th. So we'll show you a little bit later how to register for that. So today, think of today as the highlights and kind of a bit of a teaser for the webinar. And if you're really interested, we'd love to have a one-on-one discussion with you, or by all means, join us on the webcast in a couple of weeks. So just to give you a little bit of background about how this all came to be. About a little over a year ago, actually, Stacia and I, who we actually worked together several years ago, we reconnected and just to catch up, and we just kind of discovered our mutual passion around diversity and inclusion. And Stacia is an HR analyst, which means that she's constantly looking at the technology vendors that are out there, and was telling me about some of these D&I solutions that she had come across. And at the same time, in Mercer's D&I practice, we kept hearing from clients about the challenges they were experiencing and the need for some tools so that they could more broadly mitigate bias, drive inclusivity. So we just started thinking about this, like, it just seems like there's so many tools and technologies out there. Has anybody actually made any sense of this? And that was really kind of the catalyst for our partnership and for really digging into the technology market focused on diversity and inclusion. So the rest is history. And a year later, we just released our report. And just to give you just a bit of context, what we wanted to set out to accomplish. So we wanted to understand the types of technologies and solutions that were already available in the market. We wanted to understand the types of problems they were trying to solve, and were they actually having an impact, a business impact, an impact in driving a diverse workforce or an inclusive culture. We wanted to understand kind of the benefits and also the potential risks of using a technology across an organization. And then we wanted to hear from customers about their experience using the tools. So that was really kind of what we set out to accomplish. And Stacia, why don't you share a bit about exactly how you went around about doing that?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. And thanks to everybody who's listening today. We're really excited to share this new report. So it's interesting because some of Carol's story actually influenced the methodology of how we did the research. So before Carol and I had started talking, I had, as she mentioned, already kind of identified that this was a space that I was seeing emerging, and that there wasn't a lot of content that really tried to put a framework around what it was that people were seeing and what the vendors were offering, et cetera. And so when Carol and I first started talking, I said, I'm so excited. This is a new space. We need to get there. We need to get this research out there. And she, thankfully said, yes, let's do it. And what ended up leading to was, in our haste to get something out, we created a two-part methodology to doing the research. So, and this kind of actually is a reflection of how the market is expanding and growing, and was actually much bigger than we initially thought. So for the first part of the study, we initially put out a relatively short poll to folks and said, can you give us some basic background information on what your solution is and what you're doing and what challenges you're trying to solve, et cetera. And we had organizations, about, I think it was 63 vendors in total, that we either identified through the poll or through our research, our public research. So we did a lot of research on articles that had been written, and a lot of networking to have people tell us who they were seeing. So that was very much so a grassroots approach. So that was the first part, the 63 organizations, and then we followed up with some briefings with many of them, et cetera. And that those insights we put together in an initial report that we had shared back in September. Now, we knew that that was not nearly as comprehensive as we wanted to be, but we were just trying to get the word out there and to generate some enthusiasm, share some of our enthusiasm, really. And so then we put out a much bigger survey to the vendors, and we were able to get an additional 33 vendors who were involved in that research. And so we had a total of 96 vendors that we surveyed, and then we had another 9 vendors that we've kind of gathered public information on. And then what we did for this final report is we incorporated everything we had learned in September, and we added in all the quantitative data, all the customer stories, all the briefings and interviews and everything into this final report, which we have just published, which has 105 vendors within it.
Yeah, and maybe,
so there we go.
Yeah, go ahead and maybe just share like some of the highlights of the market, and before we get into the details.
Yeah, so you can see here some of the key findings that we had. So 105 vendors. We found that this is, as we expected, a small market, or a young market, actually, is probably the better way to quantify it. So 60% of the D&I tech vendors are 0 to 4 years old. So these are a lot of vendors who have been started to address this challenge of diversity and inclusion. You know, in the research we divided the market into 3 different areas. We have D&I focus vendors, so that means that the only thing that they're doing is focusing on diversity and inclusion challenges. D&I feature vendors, which means that they do other things, but they have a specific feature dedicated to diversity and inclusion. And then finally, D&I friendly vendors, which means this is not really their primary thing, but because of the way that the technology works, it could have positive implications for diversity and inclusion. So you can see the range, but the 60% that we've got here on the screen of those D&I tech vendors that are 0 to 4 years old, those are heavily balanced towards the D&I focus vendors. So those brand new vendors coming into the market to focus on this area. Then given the survey results that we saw in the size of the market, we estimate the overall market size is about 100 million. So we know that the HR technology vendor market is, you know, much, much bigger than that. So this is a relatively small space. But if you think about the fact that just 6 years ago, when I started doing research in this space, we didn't see any vendors in the space. And I would even venture 3 years ago, we were only just starting to hear the rumblings of vendors. So to already see this number of vendors who are playing here and this market size, I think is a reflection of how quickly growing this space is.
Great, great. And to get really tactical for a moment, I'm just going to switch my screen to show the viewers where they can access the research. And we're going to also show our interactive market map and use that as a way to share some of the vendors that are covered. So here I am at info.mercer.com/D&I Tech. Here is where you can access the research and also register for our webinar on March 6th. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what's here. It's a great site to come and explore the findings of the research. So let me show you. This is kind of the cool thing that we put together is this interactive market map where you can come. So by all means, please read the report. There's a lot of great tidbits in here. But if you're really just kind of interested in saying, you know, I want to take a look at what types of vendors are in the talent acquisition space, specifically around candidate sourcing, you can come here and explore these vendors, understand what type of technology they are, a quick description of them, and kind of get a sense of the market. And so maybe, Stacia, what would be helpful for our viewers is to kind of take them through this map that they can come and explore themselves, but give them a sense of the types of solutions that are out there in the market. And then we'll switch back and actually highlight a few of the innovative solutions.
Yeah, definitely. So as folks can see here, we define the market into really many of the talent management practices that we see in organizations today, because that's where, in general, when I've done research in the past, where we've seen the most strong impact from diversity inclusion efforts is when they're integrated fully into our talent management practices. And a lot of these technology vendors are as you would hope, are focusing on those talent management practices. So it made sense to align it to these 4 buckets of talent acquisition, advancement and development, engagement and retention, and analytics. Now, when you think about talent acquisition, you can see we've divided it into candidate selection and sourcing. And talent acquisition as a whole is the biggest space. So about 43% of the vendors in our survey are in the talent acquisition space, split there between, almost split evenly between candidate sourcing and candidate selection. So we'll show you some examples of what those are, but you can see here that's how we've arranged it. So moving on to advancement and development, in terms of an overall percentage of organizations, it's about 19% of the organizations in the study are in this space. And as you can see, we looked at performance management, leadership development, career management, learning and development, and hypo selection. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting here is that we've pulled out hypo selection from some of the other practices. And the reason for that is we know that particularly in this space, a lot of unconscious bias can come into the hypo selection process. It's so often about who you know and that kind of thing. So we thought it was important to actually pull that out as a separate space. And in the report, you can see some information about what the biggest segments are, or how it's divided. But in this research, we found roughly 30% of the vendors in this space were in learning and development, and 30% were in the mentorship and career management space. So moving on then down to the bottom, we have the engagement and retention space. And what was kind of interesting, I smile, about this space is when we asked the vendors, what are the primary factors that you're trying to influence? They said engagement and retention. So this is the challenge, this is their success metric, et cetera. But only 12% of the vendors that we saw in the survey are actually focused on engagement and retention directly. So, it kind of seemed like a mismatch, and potentially if there's any vendors listening, it's an opportunity to really think about how can we go more directly at the engagement and retention space from a diversity and inclusion perspective. But here we divide it into 3 areas. Employee experience, which I think a lot of people have a sense of what it is. And I'm starting on the left because I want to tell you something interesting about employee voice. So starting up with employee experience there on the left, and that tends to be things like the employee engagement surveys or culture surveys, a sense of how the diverse employee or workers experience is different than maybe the majority population experience. So there's a lot of different examples in there. Employee communications is much more about how is the organization communicating to diverse individuals, and how might that be different, again, than the majority population. And employee voice, this is the one that I know I went a little bit backwards here, but I wanted to spend a few more moments on it, because employee voice is very much so about how do we not just communicate to or get some high-level information back from diverse employees, but how do we actually enable employees to lift up their voices so that regardless of their diversity characteristics, they are heard equally in the organization. So you see here, there's an example from a company called Waggle that allows people to contribute their ideas to a specific question in a way that's anonymized so that you can't actually see who's contributing the ideas. And then we've also got in there another company called Ballooner, which I'll highlight in just a few minutes. They've got a really cool solution that allows diverse people to give their perspectives, really gives anybody the ability to do it, but diverse people kind of see a benefit from that. Okay, then let's go ahead and move on to analytics over there, because that's the last area. In analytics, this is one of the areas that we heard the most interest from when we were talking to practitioners. And this represents about 26% of organizations in the survey of the vendors. And what we saw there was that there's a big focus on D&I analysis. And that is probably the biggest focus. About 64% of the vendors within this space are focused on D&I analysis. And so what that meant was things like compensation analysis. It could also be understanding representation or pipelines, or kind of the whole, anything that was analytical kind of fit into that space. But then we've got 2 others, which are D&I business case. So those are really focused on helping people understand what the business case is for D&I in your own organization. So, if you increase the representation of women in your organization, what are the potential business benefits you're going to see. So we've got 3 vendors there. And then down farther is ERG management and analysis. And we've got 4 vendors there, knowing that a lot of organizations have big ERGs, but often don't know or struggle to manage them. These are 4 different solutions that can help you there. I know I rushed through that very quickly. I'm just sensitive to time, so apologize to folks for speaking quickly, but hopefully that gives you an overview.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, we, our D&I network meeting back in December, we polled our audience of D&I leaders. And when we asked kind of where would you want to use technology? I mean, there's a variety of answers, but I was surprised at the number that said, geez, we really need help with our ERG management. And so, and really being able to quantify the impact of those ERGs. So not just be able to manage them and what they're doing, but really be able to quantify the impact. And I'll just point out one other feature of the market map before I move on. You know, we've kind of identified these subcategories, but if you'll notice this example plan box, that a lot of these tools actually belong to multiple subcategories. So you can kind of see which are you know, kind of singular D&I focused for one particular talent activity, and which ones have multiple capabilities. So something that you can explore when using this tool. So hope that you come to the site and check it out for yourself. So I'm going to move back over to our PowerPoint here. And we'll spend the remainder of our time kind of highlighting one particular tool from each of these areas, just to give you a sense of what do they actually look like? What do they actually do? And then hopefully if you're even more interested, you'll read the report or come to the webinar because we'll cover even more of these solutions. So Stacia, let's start with talent acquisition. Let's start with Textio. A lot of companies have at least heard of this particular tool. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so Textio is a tool that's designed to, they call it an augmented writing platform, is the language that they use. And what it's designed to do is to help you understand how the language that you're using might be perceived. In this instance, it's particularly by men versus women. So you can see here on the example, if Carol, if you can show the kind of slightly masculine tone versus feminine tone that's over on the right on that scale.
Yes.
Right there, yep. So that shows you, that's the color scale that they use for specific words. So if we go back to the actual job description that's here, and again, so this is in the candidate sourcing section, you can see that in this example, they say our agency needs a killer media buyer. Now that you can see from the blue, it tends to be a masculine way of talking about yeah, it's just masculine words. And what that means is it tends to appeal more to men and actually to be a bit more repellent to women. And so what Textio will do is it will give you some suggested alternatives. So instead of a killer media buyer, it might be a highly successful, or there's some other word that isn't quite so aggressive in tone. So you can kind of see, and they will continue on with different recommendations. So the green ones, they just will offer an alternative word. So there might be something that's a bit clearer. So it's not just necessarily about gender, but also about clarity of messaging. And then over on the far right, you can see that they've got a number of other suggestions. So for instance, in this instance, the job posting is too short. The sentences are too short. There's not enough bulleted content, etc. And so the way that this works is that Textio can, because of the way that they hook into systems, they can give a sense of, are we getting the benefit, or is somebody actually converting, and who are converting, who's clicking on the ads, etc. And then they feed that back into their algorithm so that they can make sure that this is targeted for a specific organization. So a lot of organizations have seen some benefits from this. In the report, we've got examples from Zillow and Johnson & Johnson, who have reported benefits in terms of their speed to hire, and then their increase in the number of applicants that identify as women. So part of the reason that a lot of folks have heard about Textio is that they seem to be getting a lot of market success.
Great. And here we're on advancement and development for TrustSphere.
Yeah, so one of the fun things about my job is I get to see all these different technologies that maybe are not kind of top of mind for folks. And TrustSphere is an organization that looks at the networks of individuals. And so that may not be top of mind for folks, but I think it's something that's really coming. So I love sharing this example. So what TrustSphere will enable you to do is they do something that's called passive organizational network analysis. And passive O&A allows you to look at the emails, not the content, but just the who is on the email, as well as meetings from something like an Outlook or from a Google Calendar. And what they can do is map what an employee's strongest and weakest relationships are. And they do that across an entire network. So you can start to see who's a central node in the network, who's a connector, who's a bridger, all these different parts of the network. Now, what TrustSphere does from an inclusion perspective is it can a couple things. One, it can help you understand how well how included somebody is in the network. So is somebody, are women, for instance, equally included in the network as men are? Do they have the same types of relationships, same strengths? They can also, as we show here on this example, enable you to see what the strongest relationships are and who they're with. So in this example, if you look on the center column there, we've got a male's employee strongest relationships. And this is just an example that TrustSphere shares. And you can see that for the male, they have a lot of internal relationships for the same grade or higher. So that's the orange. So 35, yep. And then they have lower grade relationships with 18 right there. So you can kind of see that's where the male employees' relationships, and then 5 are external. For females, you can see the map is very different. So female employees' strongest relationships are actually external to the organization in this example. They have some at the same grade or higher, 7, and then they have quite a few at the lower grade. And so what this could help you do from an advancement or development perspective is say, hey, maybe we need to be connecting our women into the network differently, or maybe we need to be thinking about sponsorship in this organization in a different way. Or, you can kind of see where you could go with this, whether it's leadership development, whether it's ERGs, whether it's, just thinking about rotation programs. There's a number of ways that you can do this. But, if we know that so many promotions and the way that women tend to rise up in organizations tends to be through their informal networks, this gives you a way to see what those networks are and to give people a tool to help them address where their potential network shortcomings are.
Great. And do you have a sense of this organizational network analysis? Is it typically kind of a one-time do the analysis and then, ultimately there may be a need for an intervention, or is this something that might be available to a frontline manager ongoing to be able to see what's happening?
Yeah, so this is right now it's very nascent. So the instances where I've seen it has been when it comes in with a leadership development program. And so often what they'll do is they'll do a network assessment at the beginning of the program, maybe have a year-long program where they talk about things like the network, talk about development, et cetera. And then at the end of the year, come back and look and see, did you change your network? What's different? So that I think you can kind of see, that's the way I've seen it the most commonly. Microsoft actually has a tool that will enable an individual to see this for themselves. So that is something that could be more regularly available to folks. Again, this is on the early side of things. So kind of that all on all the time is a newer concept, but I don't think it's necessarily that far out, particularly if you're talking about information just for an employee to understand their network map. When we start talking about much bigger, I think we'll probably have to get into issues of ethics and trust and some other factors if we're talking about always having access. But empowering individuals to see what's happening in their network, I think, is something that's probably not too far off.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, let's take a look at an example, Ballooner, from engagement and retention.
Yeah, so I kind of previewed Ballooner when we were talking a few moments ago. And what Ballooner does, it's engagement and retention, and they fit into the employee voice section. And what they do, which I think is really neat, is they give a way to solicit ideas from a team, and then a way for individuals to contribute such that it doesn't show immediately who they are. So you could ask, for instance, a question on, how do we engage our customers more? Now, Carol, you and I have been in meetings where that question has come out, and the most senior person in the room says, well, I think that we should call them. We should all call them and we should talk to them more. And everyone goes, absolutely. And here's how we could call them more efficiently. And, and they all go down that track without anybody else saying, hey, maybe we should survey them, or, some alternative. So what Ballooner does is it's a tool that's been designed entirely to address biases that can exist, particularly for underrepresented individuals, and provides a way to anonymize that information, to allow people to upvote it, to downvote it, to give comments and feedback, and basically to brainstorm in a way that you're not influenced by who said what until the end of the process, where you can say, okay, well, this is actually a question that Carol put out, and the winning idea was from, Jenny, who's actually the admin, or whatever it is. But it gives you a way to democratize ideas and raising your voice, and I think that's really powerful.
And really, it seems like a great way to drive innovation. It's that whole inclusivity of all the ideas, and then ultimately, trying to find the best one.
Exactly.
Okay, last one is an analytics example.
Yeah, so this is from a company called Pipeline, and what they're trying to do is to help you understand what the impact is of your of who is in your pipeline and what your different hiring decisions and performance and promotion decisions will make. So if you look here on the top, you see there's a pipeline score, which is the score that they give showing how close to 50-50 you are. So in this instance, they're looking at gender equity. And so how close to 50-50 you are. And then they have a projection based on some research that they've done in the past of the economic gain of getting to 50-50 for an organization. So given where your organization, in this example, where your organization is today, what would be the gain of getting to 50-50 based on their models? So then if you go farther down, you can see that they've got 5 specific areas, one on hiring score, one on hiring, pay, performance, potential, and promotion. And so what this gives you a sense of is, given, for instance, with hiring, how you've hired in the past, how is that advancing you towards this goal of getting to 50-50 in terms of gender equity? On pay, how close are you to getting to equal pay across your organization? Performance score, how likely are you to be giving performance scores that, from a statistical perspective, you're giving men and women the same number of high performing 5s if you're on a 5-point scale. So basically making sure that you have equity in terms of how your performance scores are being awarded. Same with potential, and then promotion. They take all this, they roll it up, and then that's how they give you your pipeline score. So I think it's nice because it's not just looking at representation, but it's actually looking at these different factors that we know get us to more equal representation, and giving you a sense of how you're performing on each of them, which is the nice thing about this tool.
Right. Yeah. I like the economic gain piece of it. I think that's a unique factor.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think the other thing that's unique is just bringing these 5 factors, which we know from research influence representation, bringing them together in one place so you can really focus on them. So, in this example, you can see, hey, we're not promoting women anywhere near at the same level as we are doing men, but we're actually doing pretty well on hiring. So, okay, let's focus, certainly on all 5, but especially on promotion.
Great. Perfect. Well, hopefully for our viewers and for anyone who's on the platform that watches this as a replay, hope that this was at least a nice sneak peek of the D&I technology research. Both Stacia and I are happy to meet with you to talk through some of those findings if you'd like to have a conversation. Again, you're welcome to visit our website to look at the interactive market map, download the report, join our webinar, and we'll look forward to hearing your comments as well.
Well, thank you both. That is all the time we have for today. Stacia and Carol, really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise. To those of you tuning in, thank you again for joining us on PremierTV, where leading experts deliver global perspectives. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and encourage you to continue the discussion by adding your thoughts and questions in the comment thread below. You can also download the report and view the interactive market map at info.mercer.com/DNI-tech. Just reiterating what Carol mentioned, and you can also view it within the Premier platform right under this live stream as well. Please tune in to other Premier TV panels, talks, and fireside chats to learn firsthand what new opportunities are on the horizon for your organization today. As a reminder, you can access all episodes of the Premier TV on the digital platform. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.